Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Krista Bennis and I'm a program manager here at the Mental Health Commission of Canada in the Workplace Mental Health Department, and I'm very happy to be hosting this webinar with you today. Just before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. I just wanted to let you know that audio is provided in broadcast mode through your computer speakers, so just make sure you unmute your computers so that you can hear us, and then that way we don't hear any distractions sort of in the background from all the participants. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the Mental Health Commission's website in the webinar archive section, and that'll be up there in the coming weeks. If you would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download it right now using the Files pod, and that's located in the top right of your screen. You just select the item you wish to download and click the Download File button. If you would like to ask any questions or interact with the other webinar attendees or post any comments, you can do this in the chat pod. Now this is located in the top right of your screen. So just a reminder that the comments will be public and your name will show beside it. So that way you can either see that your post is active or see if somebody else has posted something. We're going to hold off with the question and answer period at the end of the webinar. We're going to make sure we save some time. So just we'll keep an eye on the questions that get posted throughout, and we'll make sure that we take note of them, and then I'll pose them back to the our speakers today so that they can answer those. So through our webinar series through the Workplace Department, we've talked a lot about protecting the psychological health and safety of employees in the workplace. But today we're going to hear about how we can better support volunteers within your organization. So I'm really pleased to introduce our two speakers today. We have Sarah Jenner, who's the Executive Director of the Mindful Employer Canada. Sarah is a workplace mental health aficionado who strives to continually support people leaders across Canada to feel confident and competent addressing mental health workplace issues. Sarah has engaged hundreds of people leaders across Canada in conversations about how they can improve workplace mental health in a way that upholds the dignity and respect of everyone involved, while also ensuring job expectations are being met. Her goal is to develop Mindful Employer into a learning tool for people leaders across Canada who strive to support positive workplace mental health. Our next speaker is Marianne Baton. She is a workplace relations specialist who helps resolve issues for individuals, teams, and organizations. Her area of expertise includes workplace mental health, psychological safety, resolving conflict, and addressing performance concerns. She focuses on helping people get unstuck, move beyond problems, restore productivity, and improve working lives. Marianne proudly serves as the Program Director for the Great West Life Centre for Mental Health, which provides free, practical ideas, tools, and resources to help with the prevention, intervention, and management of workplace mental health issues. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers, and they'll talk to us today about protecting the psychological health and safety of volunteers.
Thank you so much, Krista. We're really happy to be here. So this is Sarah Jenner, just so you can all kind of get used to our voices. And then Marianne, I hope, is on the line still.
She is, yes.
Oh, good. Excellent. So just before we get started, we wanted to give you guys a chance to kind of introduce you to what Mindful Employer is, and right now we're just getting ready to launch our newest program, Mindful Leader, which is a certification program, and this was developed really through listening to leaders across Canada. That's something we really strive to do, and you'll notice later with the volunteer toolkit. Again, it just came from us listening to feedback we were getting from those in organizations. And with the Mindful Leader program, we really heard from leaders across Canada that they wanted a learning experience that was different than other lunch and learns, that they essentially wanted to learn what Marianne and I do. the words we use, how we address issues in a way that doesn't shame or blame and really supports an individual, whether they have a mental health issue or not. And so this is how we really develop the certification program. So if anyone is interested in it, we haven't launched it yet. We'll be launching it this summer with dates across 5 cities in Canada. You can feel free to add us on these social media platforms, or you can also follow myself, Sarah Jenner, on LinkedIn, and you'll definitely be notified when those dates become available and registration is up and running. And so today, like Krista had said, you can download both the webinar slides as well as the volunteer toolkit in both English or French. So please pick whichever one you're comfortable with. And today what we're really going to do is take you through each of the exercises and explain why they're in there and how they can really help you to support volunteers who are in your organization.
So Sarah, to start with, we all know, well, most of us know, that the National Standard of Canada on Psychological Health and Safety says that we need to protect the psychological health and safety of volunteers as well as those that are full-time employees. But the problem with that is that unlike an employee where we have a contract with them, an employment contract, and we have the power to manage their performance, speak to them about things. Volunteers, that's not always the case. And how do you manage psychological health and safety when you have no authority?
Absolutely, and this, I would say, was identified as a gap, not only within the standard, but through our Mindful Employer community of practice. And so we worked with 26 individuals from not-for-profits to really talk to them about how do you support your volunteers, what are you looking for, where are there still gaps, and like you said, it is really difficult because they're non-employees, and so there isn't necessarily the same expectation upon them, but you still want to hold a same standard to them, because whether I'm a volunteer or whether I'm an employee, I'm there because I'm passionate about the issue, and I want to come in and feel like I'm really giving something, whether it's to the organization, whether it's to my community. And so that's how we really started this conversation about the volunteer toolkit. Originally, we were going to make it into our in-house program, a session that could be led through a conversation and facilitated within the organization. But those who we were working with, our Mindful Employer community members, really did let us know that it would be so much more valuable if it were a toolkit available online that anyone within an organization could download and have access to these, I guess, exercises, if you will, to help you better support your volunteers within your organization.
Yeah, I think I remember some of them saying in most organizations there's only one volunteer coordinator, and they rarely have time to take training or to, go off on a workshop. And so they really felt that having this free and readily accessible, just give us the how-to, made more sense. So it's nice that you responded to that.
Yeah, that it really is that kind of environment now, right? The do more with less. And so we want to make sure no one really gets left behind, and that includes volunteers.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things, Sarah, that they brought up is that, what sorts of things are available to them. Because it's not all the things that are available when you're working with employees. And they talked about the Mental Health Commission of Canada's case study approach on those who implemented the standard. And one of the findings, I think that was kind of surprising to us, is that most organizations were already doing many things to support the psychological health and safety of their employees. And I think your idea is that there's probably things that employers are doing already to support the psychological health and safety of their volunteers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so for those on the line, if you have the volunteer toolkit in your hand right now, or you're looking at it on your laptop, you'll see that this really follows the question on page 2. So how does your organization currently support the health and safety volunteers? And like Marianne said, many of you, the majority of you, will already have policies in place, but then it's looking at, okay, how do we bring those into the volunteer spectrum? So whether it's orientation that you have for volunteers, so when you're orienting them, engage them with employees within the organization that maybe will be supporting them along the way, as well as tools and resources. So is your occupational health available to them? Is a wellness committee available to your volunteers? Are there perhaps human resource professionals that are available to them if they are struggling to support them? Or is it, again, your volunteer coordinator who really has access to these policies and feels supported, that they know where these policies are, they know how to support their volunteers as well? Because I think the hardest thing is that if we put someone into this position as a volunteer coordinator and we don't inform them that, hey, these are some issues that could come up in the future, this is how we let the volunteers know where they can find policies or processes, or through orientation, letting them know experiences the volunteers may have. But as the coordinator, here are some experiences you may have interacting with your volunteers, and this is how we are going to support you to address those as well.
Now, Sarah, you mentioned in there about policies, and many of the policies in organizations don't mention volunteers at all. They talk about that these policies apply to the employees. What sort of help do you have around that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see on page 4, again, in this workbook, there is a chart there for you. And what we really learned is that many of your policies that you have for employees could be amended to also fit your volunteers. So whether there's around performance, whether it's around a volunteer is overwhelmed and maybe they need to take time off from volunteering for the organization, and how are we going to bring them back into that position when they are feeling well again. So an idea around accommodation. So there's great resources like supporting employee success, which is an accommodation resource that's available on workplacestrategiesformentalhealth.com, the program that Marianne runs. And that resource is completely free. And you don't necessarily wouldn't have to go through it, but just having these policies in place so you know when this comes up with a volunteer, we have a policy specifically for them and how we can help them with that. I would say what we've heard most is that you need to have policies in place around bullying and harassment for your volunteers, because they often are the ones on the front line dealing with the public or having interactions with clients. And just like your employees need to understand, there is a line that these clients or who members of the public cannot cross with our employees. And if they do cross this line, this is how we're going to empower you to address those behaviors. You need to have that with your volunteers too. That while they may work for free, in absolutely no circumstance is it okay for someone to belittle them or treat them negatively. And so we also really encourage you to put a policy in place around harassment and bullying for your volunteers.
I remember listening in on a conversation about those that manage volunteers, and they were saying that often what would happen is some of their very best, most dedicated volunteers would just quit because they didn't know how to deal with these things and they didn't want to complain about it. And so I think some of these policies are also about prevention and retention of really valuable volunteers.
Absolutely, because you don't want to lose those individuals and you don't want to cause harm to them either, right? They're the ones giving their time to you to help your organization in a way. And so, again, we just want to make sure we have policies in place to really support them, to make sure that they are able to come to your organization, volunteer their time, and feel like they're fulfilling their passions and that they're really able to contribute in some way.
Great. Now, Sarah, I know you also have an approach to one-on-one meetings, but what I hear is that often the volunteer coordinator may only see the volunteers at orientation and then maybe once a year because they're just on different schedules. What do you recommend if that's the situation?
So what we recommend is really the one-on-one conversation, and this is on page 5 of your toolkit. And this is something that was developed because really, I mean, when Marianne and I worked together in the same organization, it was rare that we were in the office or in the same space together where we could have a face-to-face meeting. Or even sometimes having a telephone call and having that one-on-one discussion through there could be really difficult because you were often in meetings or giving presentations and I was working on projects. And so setting up time to do that was difficult, but it was still very important to have that established connection with one another, because I think through that consistent one-on-one, that's when you really build that rapport with an individual. That's when you can start to see maybe when something's slipping or something's off or their behaviors are just different than what they were originally. And so with this one-on-one, what we ended up doing was just doing it through email. And we actually, Marianne, as the leader, would fill it out and send it out to each of us employees. And we had an option of filling it out ourselves and sharing it with everyone, or we could send it directly to Marianne, who is our leader. And so that's an option for you as a volunteer coordinator, too, that this is something you would fill out, send to your volunteers, and then they could so choose to share it with everyone else, or they could just send it to you independently. But these questions are really created to help volunteers understand that there's still a sense of accountability, so they're still feeling like, okay, I really am bringing something to the table here. I'm a valued part of this organization. But again, it also helps you notice if there's a change in behaviors or demeanors. And so the questions include, the first is, my challenges right now are, and they include everything that could be frustrating, overwhelming, annoying, or concerning to you. And so this is something that we often forget in our day-to-day interactions, that when we see someone, we'll say, oh, hey, how are you doing? And our response is often good or great or I'm fine. And so this question is really to get to the root of, hey, what's going on with you right now? What's frustrating in this role, in this volunteer position? What's challenging you? Because then we can address it head on rather than just allowing it to continue to grow and reach a breaking point eventually. The second question is, the errors I've made this week are, and this is a scary question at times, right? We all like to think, or well, most of us probably know that we're human and we make errors, but we all have that fear of sharing our errors, especially in the workplace, because we don't want to be seen as incompetent or feel as if someone hears about this, they could take on my position because others will see them as better skilled. And so with this question, it's really important for the leader to share an error they have made. And it doesn't have to be a big catastrophic error. It could be simple, something as simple as, I meant to send out an email to one individual this week and I accidentally hit reply all. So a group of people saw it instead of just that one individual. Or the idea of, I was completing a report that I had to send in to the ministry this week and I made an error. Or as a volunteer, the idea of maybe I gave someone the wrong information and I don't have their contact, and so I'm unable to get in touch with them and let them know the resource or tool or program that they were looking for. And so the idea around errors is that if we're not holding in these secrets, we're going to feel so much freer in our position. And I think that it also reduces a sense of a fear-based organization as well. The idea that, hey, we're all going to make errors, and this is our opportunity to learn from them and think about going forward, how would I do it differently in the future? Marianne never makes errors, so she rarely had to fill it out.
You know, Sarah, what I was just thinking now is, fortunately, I make so many errors, I never had a problem filling that part out.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. The next question is specific people I've delighted in my role as a volunteer include. And so there are definitely going to be hard days, whether you're an employee or whether you're a volunteer working in this area. And so this question is really not only for the leader to better understand how the volunteer has made an impact, but also for the volunteer to take a moment and think, okay, this is something I've done this week that's made a positive impact on someone's life. Because those are the moments that are really going to get you through those tough days. And Marianne and I have said before that we use the 5-minute journal, the app, because it asks you every morning to talk about 3 things you're grateful for, and then 3 things you're looking forward to that day. And it can just be so impactful starting out with, okay, this is something, you're starting out on a positive note. And so you're just reminding yourself to continue to think in the positive, to not necessarily let a bad interaction ruin your day or ruin your week.
The part that I like best about the 5-minute journal is where it says, how are you going to make today great? Because thinking happy thoughts when things aren't going well does not work, when we're just in denial. But really saying, I have some control, even if I'm going through challenging things at work or in my personal life, I have some control in making the day as good as it possibly can be.
Absolutely. And I think it also just reminds us that we carry some of the responsibility, right, to make sure our day is good, that it's not on everyone else. It's not our environment that always makes us unhappy, but that we can really switch that around.
Yeah.
The following question, I am contributing to positive workplace mental health in this way. And so for us, not only is it important that all staff have an effect on the psychological health and safety of an organization, and that's set in the standard as well. It's not just your senior leaders who have control over how interactions are done within the workplace, but that staff as well as volunteers have a role to play, have a responsibility to ensure that the organization, their interactions, their behaviors are done in a way that supports positive workplace mental health. And so again, this is a question for those to remind them of not only how am I doing this, but you may have some individuals who don't make an effort to have a positive impact on workplace mental health within the organization. And so by having this question in there, you're reiterating the importance to them, that they play a role, and setting an expectation that we also expect you to do things that really contribute to positive workplace mental health.
Sarah, I'm wondering if this is a good place for you to talk about the Mental Health Commission resource, Being a Mindful Employee, and how that can help with this particular issue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a few slides, you'll see the information about where it can be accessed, but Mindful Employer works with the Mental Health Commission of Canada and to create this tool, Being a Mindful Employee. And its intention was to be an orientation tool for all staff to better understand the psychosocial factors that make up the standard for workplace psychological health and safety. And what it does is it defines each factor. It lets you know what that looks like in your workplace or what it could look like in your workplace. It gives you a scenario within the workplace based on that factor that you have to decide whether the response is positive, negative, or neutral. And then once you've gone through all of those factors, at the end you have a final quiz that you have to fill out. And if you get 75% or higher when you're filling out this quiz, you receive a certificate of completion for completing Mindful Employee. And
what I really like about it is that, you know, you've got a question, how did you contribute to workplace mental health? And Being a Mindful Employee actually gives you very concrete ideas on how you can contribute, so that anyone isn't just wondering, was I nice today, but actually concrete things about intervening and contributing.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only, because you could be nice, but then be neutral at the same time, right? And not address issues, and therefore they continue to happen and continue to build negativity. Whereas you're right, Marian, it really does reiterate that there are things you can do to continue to make the organization that you are either working in or you're volunteering for one that supports positive workplace mental health for all its employees and psychological health and safety.
Yeah. And it
then,
even leads into your next question here, because it can help you be aware of when people are having a positive impact. So I'll let you continue your one-on-one questions.
Yeah, you're totally right. So my fellow volunteers or employees have been helpful to me in this way. And so like Marian said, again, it's just reiterating, am I acknowledging, am I recognizing when someone is helping me? The easiest way to do it is just in the moment, right? Not to be afraid to take a second, and you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to go out and purchase a gift, but just to say to them, hey, this is how you helped me today, and this is the impact it made on my day. And just acknowledging that can be not only rewarding for you, but then it's nice to hear it as well, because then I think it just reinforces those behaviors, those positive interactions. And again, I think just like with the idea of gratitude, that you're showing gratefulness to others and why you're grateful that they helped you, or why you're grateful that they were in your life that day. And so it's just reiterating that positivity, that we're responsible for these moments in our lives. And the next question is, I was most energized when doing this volunteer work. And so this, I think, is a great piece, because we started with this is where I'm frustrated, this is what is challenging, and that's to give you a really good idea of, okay, are maybe they in a volunteer position that isn't necessarily suitable for them. Maybe there's something else available that they will find less challenging or less frustrating. And so this is a great opportunity to ask them what makes them most energized when doing their volunteer work. And maybe you'll find that there's another volunteer position that has more of that work available, and that they may want to move into that position as well. And again, I think it's just a great way to reiterate, this is how I've had a positive day. And so that, again, we're helping people leave this volunteer time frame feeling positive, feeling like they really contributed in some way to the organization.
Great.
Sorry,
go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I just noticed in the group chat that they put a link to being a mindful employee. So if you want to use that link and then just save it in your web browser, you can do that. And then in a couple slides, we'll also have a URL for you to access it as well.
Great. So Sarah, we've got up here mental health resources, and we often talk about the resources available in organizations as being your employee assistance provider, your group benefits, OC Health, union resources, but in some organizations none of those things are available to a volunteer who's struggling with their mental health. So how do you have mental health resources for volunteers?
So really, it's to think about low-cost or no-cost resources, whether it's within your organization or in your community, to leverage resources like those on workplacestrategiesformentalhealth.com. I mean, those are available for free in French and English to anyone. You do not have to be a client of Great West Life in order to access them. They're not going to ask you for any identifying information in order to download them. So it's really harnessing those. And I would say with this piece in particular, one of the most important things about it is that you as a volunteer coordinator or as a manager fill out this chart that's on page 8 of your toolkit, and it has information about different resources that are available. We've also included information about resources that are available to you, like working through it, which is a short video. There's just short video interviews of individuals with lived experience talking about what it was like having a mental illness before they were diagnosed, while they were at work, what it was like afterwards, the strategies they have in place to help them. We included checkup from the neck up. So if someone is struggling, it's a really simple assessment they can go through just to give them an idea of if they may have a mental illness and documentation that they can bring into their healthcare provider just to start that conversation. We have information about finding your local CMHA, information about the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and again, workplacestrategiesformentalhealth.com, which is just chock full of great resources that are available to you, and information about the Mental Health Commission as well. They have these webinars that are free and available, and the Family Guide to Mental Health Recovery Project, which is really an interactive documentary project that just helps to provide insight about families who have been trying to support a loved one who has a mental illness. But my biggest takeaway with this resource list is we were recently doing it with a group of individuals who were in disability management, and so fairly used to, in their day-to-day, addressing issues with individuals who may have a mental illness. And we gave them 10 minutes to fill out this resource. And once that 10 minutes was up, they vocalized how frustrated they were trying to find these resources within their organization, that they know they exist, but it was so difficult to locate them. And the issue is that in the moment, if you hand someone this blank chart and ask them, hey, go fill this out, you'll find the resources within the organization or the community. If they are in a moment of crisis or they are experiencing serious symptoms of a mental illness, it's going to be so discouraging for them. They are not going to have the time or the attention or the energy to search for them. And so what we really recommend is filling this out ahead of time, having it available at your desk if an employee comes in and is looking for resources, or filling this out and handing it out in volunteer meetings or during volunteer orientation, and just reiterating to them, hey, like, we know that there are going to be times of struggle. There's going to be times when you may have a mental health concern, a mental illness, or just experiencing significant life stressors that are going to affect you. And we want you to know that we have resources available that you can reach out to, whether it's in our organization or whether it's in our community, and that we're open to having these conversations with you and just reducing that stigma around, well, because I'm a volunteer and I'm not paid, this is my own personal issue and they're not going to want to support me in any way.
Sarah, this sort of leads me to think about you were having a conversation with me about orientation of volunteers. Mm-hmm. And you had some ideas on how to engage volunteers to do that, and I'll get you to talk about it, but couldn't the development of the mental health resources be done in a similar way? I'll just get you to explain to people your idea, and then we can link it to this.
Yeah, absolutely. That in orientation with the volunteers, you could go through this with them and have them fill it out while they're there. I think that's a really important piece too, that they are there in the moment filling it out themselves so that they know this is available to them. They're working together, so then you're also building that rapport with them, and that you're almost creating that sense of community within the volunteers, that, hey, we're in this together, and you are not just solo within this. You are not just kind of a throwaway commodity that we have because you work for free for us, that we really do value you and the work that you do.
Yeah, and again, going back to the standard, the whole idea of the sort of principles of the standard is that you engage the people that this is going to impact. And by creating orientation, by engaging the very people who have to go through that, it just makes so much sense and has so many layers of benefit. So,
mm-hmm. And we've talked about before is when you're developing this orientation, really engaging. And so we had a question come in earlier about how do we develop orientation for our volunteers? Do we hire out? Are there programs already available? And we talked about getting your best and most excited volunteers to build the program themselves and deliver the program themselves, because they're the ones who are going to have the most experience and are going to know the pieces that others are going to find really helpful. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Marianne, is really engaging those within your organization who are already volunteers to orient the new ones.
Right. Someone put on the chat that our insurance group benefits or EAP is going to cover volunteers. That happens now. It's just a matter of what the employer chooses to purchase. Now, I don't, I'm not in the insurance industry and I can't speak for them all, but I do know for sure that there are policies and programs where you can cover them. It's just that often the expense to the employer is more than what they can or want to cover, but it is an option.
Yeah, it is an option. And again, that if it's something that maybe your organization can't cover at the moment, now you have this mental health resource list to kind of get you started and to really start looking for low-cost or no-cost resources that are available to your volunteers.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that I know from the work that I've done, Sarah, is that many leaders really hesitate to speak to or approach someone who's struggling with their mental health issue. And that's when they have even a manager-employee relationship. So it's even harder when someone is volunteering their time and you're a leader who is expected to approach them. What's your advice about doing this in a way that's not going to push someone over the edge, but really deals with maybe the fact that they look like they're struggling or that their behavior is inappropriate?
Absolutely. So I think there is consistently a lot of fear around, am I going to be seen as nosy? Am I prying into their personal issues? Like you said, am I going to push them over the edge? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to make them feel less than? And that's something we all kind of hesitate and fear about. And I would say myself, I still have these fears before having these conversations. And I'm sure you do too, Marianne. But the truth is there are no magic words. I know people are constantly looking for those from us, but there's never a script you can read from that's going to work for every individual. And so with this piece, the questions to ask before engaging the volunteer on page 12, it's really about taking the time to ask yourself these questions before you have this conversation with the individual who you see is maybe struggling or who is showing negative behaviors. So there's 3 different parts. The consider your own needs, so the idea of do I have time to do this properly or am I pressuring myself to rush into this? So if you see someone struggling, the last thing you want to do is go up to them and say something like, hey, you've been acting differently lately. We need to talk about this, but I have a meeting I have to get to, so when that's done in an hour, we'll come back and have a conversation about this. Not a great idea, especially if someone is experiencing significant life stressors or a mental health concern that now they're just going to be ruminating and dreading the next 60 minutes until you come back, because it was as if not only did you were you kind of essentially flippant with them and, well, this is an issue that I just have to address because it can't continue to happen. You also didn't show a great amount of concern or give them the time to have the conversation in the moment. And so that's really important too, is to take the time to really engage the individual in question. And if you want to have this conversation with individuals, another great tool to start you off with having that conversation is the conversation framework, which is, again, through workplacestrategiesformentalhealth.com. It really talks to how you could start that conversation, questions you could ask to engage the employee. But I think the main piece around these questions here on questions to ask before engaging and in the conversation framework is to always come from a place of curiosity, to not have prejudgment about what you think is going on and why this employee is acting this way. And also not to diagnose them, essentially, is instead to, again, engage them in questions that help you get to what's going on with them, and then engage them in questions about how they feel they could be supported in their position. even though they may be struggling.
And again, Sarah, I think we've talked about this a lot, is that you're supporting them in the position is what you said. And even if they're a volunteer, their position is as a volunteer. You're not trying to solve their personal issues, give them advice about treatment or health care, or solve their financial or family or other issues. What the responsibility is to make sure that they're as well in their volunteer tasks and position as they possibly can be.
Absolutely, and it would be unethical for you to take on that role of counselor or therapist to a volunteer, because there is that power difference there, and there are resources available to them with individuals who have the knowledge and the training to take on that role and really support them. That, like you said, you're there to support them in their position while they are volunteering. And so an example with before engaging that I talk about is when I was delivering and facilitating a program about this sort of topic, that we always encourage feedback from our participants about how can we make this better, what can we do differently to support you, to really ensure that you're leaving today feeling like you have met the objectives and you are confident and competent going back and addressing ideas. And when on one particular day, someone gave me constructive feedback feeling like they hadn't really gotten the information they needed in order to feel comfortable using the tool or resource that we had shared with them. And usually on any other day, that would not have hit me hard, that I would have said, okay, you know what, let's take the time now, let's go over it again. But there had just been other factors leading up to this moment that had me feeling an additional amount of stress. And so when that constructive feedback came in, I was immediately triggered. And so because I am in this field and have been in this field for a while, it's maybe a little bit easier for me to be more self-aware of when I'm triggered and know those physical symptoms and emotional symptoms that come from being triggered, and knowing in the moment that I'm triggered. That doesn't mean I no longer experience the anxiety or the disappointment or the fear. It's just that I know why it's happening. And so luckily in that moment, I was able to step back. I didn't lash out and tell the individual that, no, they're wrong, that it was covered and we're not doing it anymore, that we're moving on to the next piece. But I was able to get a colleague to support me. And in that moment, just say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm in a good space right now to lead this. I feel like you could totally do it. You're competent, and checking with them, making sure they could feel okay leading that section. And they could. And that was great. It was teamwork in the moment, but again, it was me stepping back and making sure, okay, am I ready right now to continue to have this conversation, or do I need to step away and ground myself first?
And Sarah, that's such a great example. All of us deal with these issues all the time, right? Where having a day where we're feeling more sensitive, more vulnerable, or we're having a day where we feel defensive. But to me, all of us are on that mental health continuum at different points, even in one day. And the difference between good mental health and poor mental health is our ability to be self-aware, to name it, and then do something about it, which is what you said. So it's got nothing to do with volunteers in particular, but for all of us who are helping volunteers or leading or coordinating volunteers, that self-awareness, that emotional intelligence that you just described is critical to us being successful.
Absolutely. As leaders, we need to have that self-awareness, because we always talk about having different managers, that you have human managers and you have system managers. And so as human managers, we really do need that sense of emotional intelligence, that sense of self-awareness, because not only are we better able to understand when we're triggered, we can see when others are triggered and not take it personally and not make judgments in the moment about why they may be triggered. So yeah, I think that's a great point to add, but also to add in that I think it's just as important for volunteers at times that if they are interacting with public, with clients, with individuals, to also have that sense of, okay, I need to understand when I'm being triggered, because sometimes they are the face of your organization, right? They're out there interacting. And so you want to ensure that they feel comfortable too in these interactions, and that they feel competent that if they are triggered, they can take that moment to really ground themselves, figure out what's going on, and then reapproach the situation in a way that isn't going to have a negative outcome.
Okay, but so we're talking all about the psychological health and safety of volunteers, but what about when it comes right down to they're not doing the work they're supposed to do in the way they're supposed to do it? And just before you answer that, Sarah, I just want to say to people, I can see we're coming to a close in the webinar, and I really want to invite you to put any questions that you have up on the chat board now to make sure that you get a chance to get them answered while we're here. So Sarah, the nitty-gritty, I know that's what your productivity review tool is intended for. How do we get them to perform when we're not their boss?
Absolutely. I think the main objective here is that if someone's volunteering for your organization, they're there for a reason. It's that your organization is supporting a cause that's important to them. They're really passionate about the sector that your organization is in, and so they want to be there and feel like they're contributing in some way. And also that they're there and you need them to contribute in some way, right? They're playing some kind of role in your organization that's supporting its growth and development. And so I think by using the productivity review, that if you see a volunteer is slipping in some way, or maybe not completing all of the the expectations within the position that they hold as a volunteer, this is a great tool to have that discussion with them, really asking them what's the ongoing task that they're struggling with, what's required to accomplish this successfully. So what do they need? What maybe got in the way of them accomplishing that task? So again, really understanding maybe there's a system issue that is stopping them from doing it. Maybe there's some kind of emotional or behavioral or cognitive issue that's getting in the way of them being able to accomplish that task. And also asking them, what are you going to do differently in order to accomplish this? And so I think by having this productivity conversation with them, having them come up with the ideas about how they can accomplish it, how they can be supported to accomplish it, really makes them feel like, okay, I am a valued piece of this organization, that they really do want me here. They're going to support me in order to accomplish this this expectation or task within my position as a volunteer. But it also will help them to grow and develop and learn, because some people take on these volunteer positions because they're interested in an organization or a sector, and they're just kind of dipping their foot in the pool to see, okay, is this something that I really want to follow through on, or is this something that maybe I thought I would enjoy, but I'm not quite there? And so this is also could be seen by a volunteer as a learning opportunity for them. And so at no point do I think that you should just kind of step back and not do anything or address an issue with a volunteer, and eventually either things will implode or that the volunteer will leave because they think they're not valued. And so the productivity review is really there to help you support an employee or a volunteer to ensure they are feeling valued and they are feeling like they're contributing in some way.
Sarah, our friend Christina asked a question about would this work in an organization where the volunteers are exposed to trauma, and I answered her on the chat. But just to say to the other listeners, this is really a broader, generic approach to engaging volunteers, protecting their psychological health and safety, but it does say that you have to look at the actual tasks they're being asked to do. Are they prepared for them? Are they properly trained for them? Do they know what to do if things go wrong? But more importantly, and in alignment with the standard, if you are exposing a volunteer to any kind of hazard, including psychological injury from trauma, then you are required to make sure that you are protecting them and mitigating or eliminating risk to the best of your ability. So these specific things that you're asking your volunteers to do should be part of a conversation. And how can we protect you? What is it that you need in order to be able to do this and not experience the harm for it? I'm thinking about volunteers in particular, that they shouldn't be exposed to traumatic incidents unless they are properly prepared for it. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we actually had a question come in prior to the webinar where someone was asking about individuals who acted as volunteers and were exposed to war stories and how you can prepare them for that. And really for us, preparation is key. So the idea that people who are going to be in the position should really be, like Marianne said, oriented by listening how those how others who were in this position reacted the first time they heard a story that triggered them and how they dealt with it. So have, like we said, your experienced volunteers talk to your new volunteers and say, you know what, someone told me this story once. It really hit so close to home. This is how I reacted and this is how I dealt with it. Not in a way that is telling this volunteer this is how you need to deal with it too, but just letting them know that it's going to happen and it's okay. And so they were also asking about how should you have a volunteer respond to an individual who's telling them maybe a traumatic or a horrific story, and to really have that volunteer respond in a way that is not judgmental, is not blaming or shaming or re-traumatizing, and asking them questions like, how have you managed with that? Or how have you coped with that? How have you gone through life since seeing this or experiencing this, and how have you dealt with it? So again, just engaging in conversation and questions, and not necessarily giving out advice on how they should deal with it or what their emotional experience will be in that moment.
Great. I think, Sarah, that there are some other questions. Krista, have you got some questions that you need to ask?
I do. That was fantastic. Thank you both so much. So sort of building on what you're already discussing, we had a question around the legality piece. So what kind of duty to accommodate legally do our organizations have with respect to ensuring the protection of the mental health of volunteers?
Sorry, Sarah, are you going to take that, or you want me to take it?
No, I'll let you take it.
Okay. So I think that in terms of human rights or legal liabilities, it's the same as what we would look at for employees. And a lot of the things that both Mindful Employer and the Great West Life Center for Mental Health in the Workplace do is sort of go beyond covering your butt, if you will, by protecting yourself against legal liability, to really taking an approach where what we're doing is supporting success. And some of that is just an underlying intention, that we're not trying to find someone doing it wrong. We're not trying to point out what the deficits are, but rather trying to say to someone, this is what we need from you and how can we help you to do that. Now, Krista, I don't know, does that cover the answer to that question adequately?
I think it does, Marianne. Thank you. I have a couple of others, too, that I could move on to. So not directed at anyone in particular, so I leave it to both of you to decide. But I know that in your presentation, you, Sarah, suggested that or volunteer coordinators could use the toolkit to help facilitate that sort of orientation process. But we had a question around what other resources could volunteer coordinators use to help train or orient new volunteers that could be facilitated by them.
So again, I would just reiterate, have a conversation with the volunteers you already have. Engage them in discussions about where are there still gaps, where are there challenges, where are there frustrations. how could we go about addressing these? What do you need in order to feel supported in your role? And from this information that you're given, I think you're going to find that there are going to be a lot of similar answers from your volunteers who have maybe been there a few years and have seen the ropes. And from that, you can then add to an existing orientation you already have. And again, I would just really reiterate, looking at workplace strategies for mentalhealth.com, they have policies on there already for employees. And again, they could be amended to suit volunteers. The question you want to ask yourself, again, when you're developing policies for volunteers is, how is this policy going to benefit our volunteers? And are there any negative consequences that could come from this that maybe we're not thinking about in the moment? And when you're looking at these policies, if you're amending them for volunteers, engage some of your volunteers in amending them so that they can really say, okay, this may not be something you thought of as a volunteer coordinator, but this is something that if within this policy we experience that we think you should add in, or maybe this is something that doesn't really affect us at all, so we don't need to address it.
I just want to add to a great resource that I found is Volunteer Canada. And they have many of these kinds of templates and ideas. But also Kathy asked a question about can you insure volunteers? And that is one organization that does have a plan. So I think it's just volunteercanada.ca, but it may be .com. I don't have it handy. But check them out. The other one is Imagine Canada, which is really set up for organizations that want to contribute finances or money to the greater good, but they also have a lot of free resources on how to run an organization, including some volunteer organizations. So you might check those out.
Thank you. And I'm not sure, I know that, Marianne, you responded to this question in the chat, but I guess just more broadly, we had some questions around whether this toolkit was applicable to all ages. You know, specifically there was a question around teenage volunteers and also around the different types of volunteers. You spoke a bit about, you know, like whether first responders or those individuals who are volunteering around frontline mental health pieces, and whether this is sort of an applicable toolkit no matter what kind of an environment you're volunteering in, but particularly maybe going back to the age piece, because I don't think we've heard about that yet.
No, and I'm going to pass that to Sarah, who's a couple decades younger than I am and has given this a fair amount of thought.
Yeah, so I would say this toolkit can definitely be amended to fit different age groups. I think where you're going to see the change is how it's delivered, where some who are of an older generation maybe feel more comfortable with a face-to-face conversation or over the telephone conversation, whereas you may find with younger generations that they're more comfortable having these conversations through email or through text. It's really, again, about engaging them and asking them, what are you most comfortable with? How can we support you? And I would say we had a question prior about teenage volunteers and them being in potentially traumatic positions, volunteering with emergency medical response teams. And for that, we really just reiterated the one-on-ones, that if you feel like volunteers are in positions where they may experience traumatic mental stress, or where they may experience a situation where they have to go against their values, or they're hearing about traumatic moments from someone else who has experienced a traumatic moment, the one-on-ones are your really key pieces. That's where you're going to build the rapport with your volunteers. That's where you're going to start the conversation, and you're going to be better able to hear or see the differences in behaviors or emotions. And it's going to make it so much easier for you to approach them if they are struggling when you notice something, because it's not like they've started volunteering 2 years ago, you've never spoken to them in person, and now there's this issue you have to address. now you've gone through and had conversations with them, and it'll feel more natural, I think, to both parties.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you both for today's webinar. We hope that everyone enjoyed it. I know that I'm really looking forward to sharing this resource with the organization that I volunteer with. So thank you, Sarah and Marianne, for your time today and for sharing this great information.
Oh, thank you so much, Krista.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
We just wanted to let all the participants know before you go that you're going to receive an email in the next few hours, and it will contain a satisfaction survey. So we encourage you just to take a few minutes to fill that out and let us know how you felt about the webinar. And it also just helps us to continue to improve our webinar series. So if you have any ideas in terms of other things you'd like to hear about, we want to know. Again, a reminder that the resources are available in this the tab at the top of your screen under the File tab, so please download those resources. I know that Sarah had left her contact information, I believe Marianne too, throughout the presentation. We have a webinar email that you can send, and it will be on our website in the coming weeks. So thank you again, everyone. Thanks again, Marianne and Sarah, and have a great afternoon.
Bye.